the beginning of the Pesach Seder, we have an interesting ritual, which is called karpas. We take a vegetable, a number of different vegetables can be used, potato, an onion, lettuce, celery, and we dip it in salt water. Before that, we wash our hands, and we say the blessing, Borei Pri Ha'adamah, for vegetables. What is the meaning behind this ritual? And the Talmud tells us that basically it's to make the children ask, to pique their curiosity. Why are we doing this? We don't usually do this for a meal. We don't usually serve such hors d'oeuvres. And we don't wash our hands for a vegetable. We wash our hands for bread, but not for a vegetable. And in fact, this is one of the 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? On other nights, we don't dip our food. And on this night, we dip twice. The karpas in the salt water. And then later, we dip the maror, the bitter herbs, into the charoset. So that's the simple reasoning behind this ritual. But there is a much deeper reason behind this. And this is mentioned by Rabbeinu Manoach, one of the commentators on the Rambam. And he says as follows, that this reminds us of the time that the brothers of Joseph sold him as a slave and then took his beautiful coat back to their father. They dipped it in the blood of a goat and they said to their father, do you recognize this coat? And he said, yes, it must be the coat of my beloved son Yosef. He must have been torn apart by the wild animals. And of course, that's not what had happened. He had been sold as a slave. He went down to Egypt. Eventually, he became the vizier, the second in command of Egypt. And ultimately, he brought down his family and he provided for them in Egypt. So we are reminded of the coat of Yosef that was dipped in the blood. And in fact, this is not just a stretch. Because if you look at Rashi, when Rashi speaks in our parasha about the ketonet pasim, that beautiful multicolored coat of Yosef, he uses the word karpas, referring to the Megillah of Esther, where it also uses that in reference to a fine linen or wool garment. So there is this connection. But of course the question is, well, why are we doing this at the Seder? What's the point of doing this at the Seder? And a beautiful explanation that I once heard from Rabbi Pesach Krohn goes as follows. For the duration of the Seder, we speak about how we got out of Egypt. There were wondrous plagues. There were the 10 plagues. And in fact, there is a discussion amongst a number of rabbis that perhaps there were more than 10 plagues. Maybe there were 100 plagues. Maybe there were 200 plagues. And there were signs and wonders, and God came with an outstretched arm and a mighty hand, and he took us out. The whole evening is about the miracles of the Exodus. But we never really speak about how we got into Egypt. How is it that we got into Egypt? And that's why we just make a little bit of a hint. We don't say it explicitly, but we make a hint by dipping that karpas in the salt water to remind us of how it is that we got into Egypt. And why was it? Because brothers didn't get on with brothers. Because one brother hated another brother. Because the brothers hated Yosef and were prepared to sell him as a slave and to trick their father into believing that he had been ripped apart by a wild beast. That's how we get into exile. When Jewish people don't get on, it leads to tragedy and it leads to exile. And that's exactly what happened in the times of the Second Temple. There was sinat chinam, there was causeless hatred amongst Jews. They were pious Jews. They studied Torah. They did mitzvot. But there was hatred amongst them, baseless hatred, unnecessary things. And that's how it is that God destroyed the Second Temple. And that's why we are still in exile to this very day. And as the Talmud tells us, any generation in which the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, has not been rebuilt, it's as if it was destroyed in that generation because we are not rectifying that sin. We have to make sure that there isn't baseless hatred amongst us. As the great Rabbi Kook said, there has to be ahavat chinam. There has to be love between one Jew and another for no reason whatsoever. And that is why it's so appropriate at the beginning of the Pesach Seder to remind ourselves, how did we get into this mess? Yes, it's important to know how we got out of it, but how did we get into it? And to make sure that this will never happen again, and to love one another, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, as the Torah says, to love your fellow as you love yourself. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.